This past Christmas, my wife and I bought our 4-year-old son the new Jim Kay illustrated version of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. We thought he was probably old enough to sit still and read a chapter book, and we thought the illustrations would help keep him engaged. We were right. 4 months later, we've read the first 3 Harry Potter books: Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and Prisoner of Azkaban. Since that's all the illustrated versions that are available so far, we decided to start over and read them again. So, here we are.
Hermione.
So what happens?
He comes from Ron first and Hermione.
And that happens in this book, right? Mm-hmm. We are getting ready to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Can the time go until nighttime?
What's that?
What is it counting down the time for?
It's actually counting up the time. It's counting the time that we're recording. And then that's why Tori can listen to it too, because I know she wants to hear it. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Ooh, what's that?
Hogwarts.
Hogwarts. Harry Potter.
Neville's toad sneaking.
There's Neville's toad.
Yeah, look, there's Hedwig, there's Harry. That Hedwig gives him.
Oh, there's Hedwig.
And there's some other owls right here. Neville's toad.
Oh, there's Neville's toad, yeah.
And then the little cat. He's not right there.
Oh, look, a little cat in a box, yeah.
The black cat.
Yeah.
Okay. You know how that's black cat?
Do you remember what that's called?
No. The sword.
Yeah, you got it. The sorting hat, yeah.
Sorting hat.
Okay.
I said sword hat. Sword hat.
Right.
These are the magic flying keys.
The flying keys, yeah. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much.
Is that Dudley when he was a baby?
It sure is. Do you see any pictures of Harry?
No.
Yeah.
There's no pictures of Harry. Why?
Well, do they like Harry?
No.
No. So they don't put main pictures of Harry up.
What picture were you looking at?
I'm looking at all of them. I was laughing at this. It says up here, Grunning's Drills. Boring is our business. That's a little tagline. It's kind of funny. They're saying the drills are boring.
Right. Because you have to wait on time if you drill for a long time.
Yeah.
It's boring for them.
Yeah, it really is.
But it's not boring for Harry and Hogwarts and other wizards.
Yeah. It's probably boring for them, too. I think they'd find it boring. Yep. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck.
See, this is what it says for.
Yep, that's what it says. Although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck. Oh, Mrs. Dursley has the long neck. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Oh.
She's like this long neck.
Yeah. That's funny you remembered that. Which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called...
Dudley. 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 Dudley.
Yeah. And in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years.
But Ron and Hermione found out, and everyone in Hogwarts.
Yeah, they all know about the Potters, right? This is before. This is like right when Harry's a little baby. So his parents are still alive.
Look at this jar I made.
Oh, cool.
This is the flathead that is on the table, and these are parts that the flower come out of. You see? These are the parts that flower come out of.
Oh, yeah.
It's a flower jar. Okay.
Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived on the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son, too, but they had never even seen him. Who's the Potters' small son?
Harry.
Yeah. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull gray Tuesday our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she rustled.
It's like a bug track eating a bug track.
A bug track eating a bug track?
Yeah, nobody knows about this except Muggles.
Oh, it's something Muggles know about?
Yeah.
And Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair.
Why? But only Harry knows about those. Only Harry's the only wizard that knows about those.
None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. An owl.
12, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's counting up.
That's right. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls.
Oh, why was he throwing the cereals at the wall?
He's just a little baby, and babies sometimes have a hard time controlling their emotions.
Why was he using the tantrum, throwing his cereal at the wall? I mean, Mrs. Dursley kept giving him the new cereal, but he kept going.
Yep, he kept throwing it at the walls, just like that. Why would babies do that?
Because they don't know who's controlling their body.
Ah, yeah. Well, the other's probably a little bigger than that. He's probably figured out how to control his body. You mean like little baby Maxine? Yeah. Dudley's maybe a year old, so he's about a little younger than baby Harrison.
Harrison is older than him.
Yeah. Little type, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of No. 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. It was
a cat reading a map.
For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind.
That's what magical cats can do.
Yeah, well, is that really a cat?
No.
Who is that?
Professor McGonagall.
Yeah, Professor McGonagall. So I don't know if cats, magical or otherwise, can do it. But Professor McGonagall.
It's a person, but you can be things that persons can, but cats can't.
That's right. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove, As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But, on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes.
So you got two.
Yeah.
Flip the page. I'm saying this and I'm going to flip the page. And I'm going to go forward. So this page I'm going to go 5.
Yeah. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of those weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and he was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him.
That means his Sal is so Slytherin.
You think he's Salazar Slytherin?
Yeah, because he must be, because green is for Salazar Slytherin when they're playing Quidditch.
Ah, yeah, no, the Slytherin team always wears green, you're right.
So it might be a Slytherin whispering something. Whispering. Excitedly.
Interesting, yeah. Something excitedly?
Look, see? That's him with his head off of him.
Oh, yeah, you're looking at that.
He took his head off.
Turned to head to that picture of nearly headless Nick. Let's stay on the page.
Well, it was that nearly headless Nick.
Well, his head's not all the way off, is it? It's still kind of attached. But here, let's stay on our page that we're on. Ooh, let's see. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that had to be it.
No, it wasn't.
The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window of his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owl swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Here, come sit back down, please.
I'm still listening.
I know, but I want you to sit next to me. Get down, please.
I want to.
No, I don't want you to read. Thank you. Thank you.
Why? Why?
So we can read it together. It's hard if you're standing on top of the couch like that. Most of them had never seen an owl even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. How far should we finish this page and then be done?
No.
What page do you want? How far do you want to go?
Until they fight the mountain troll.
Till they fight the mountain troll? You want to read all the way till they fight the mountain troll. Let's see. Where's the mountain troll?
Must be anywhere. Any chapter.
It's like the end of the book. It's all the way over here. Let's find a good. Let's agree on a good stopping spot.
Wait till we get this Quidditch game.
Harry plays his first Quidditch game. You want to read this much book?
It's okay if we read out of chapters.
What's that?
Look, the mountain troll. We were at the mountain troll, so the mountain troll's been like.
I don't think we got to the mountain troll yet.
No, the mountain troll was right anywhere.
It's back here, you think? Yeah.
I saw it.
Okay.
I know it's back.
There's the mountain troll.
But when they fight the mountain troll, so that's back here.
Yeah.
Fight the mountain troll.
That's on page 145. We're on page 3.
And that's past 100.
Yeah.
So it's a very far. Look what I did.
How about we read? Look. We read. We'll finish this page. And we'll read to here.
No, dude.
Okay, there.
That's all just shouting.
All right. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. He was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in his bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. "The Potters, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry." Mr. Dursley stopped dead.
Why did he stop dead?
Well, stop dead means that you stop cold in your tracks. You just stop right where you are. And what? Yes. Oh, yes, just like that. So he stopped like that, frozen like a statue, because he heard the name Potters. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something, but then thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking.
When you read the note, that stop.
That's the stopping part? Okay. I'm up here. No, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. He might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door.
Who is it?
"Sorry," he grunted as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. Remember what color violet is?
The Ravenclaw.
Oh, a Ravenclaw, yeah. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a big, wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passerbys stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to the car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination.
It's a complete stranger.
Yeah. And he seems very silly, huh? Want to see where we are? We're right there. As he pulled into the drive.
He's like hugging him around the neck.
Yeah.
Doing this.
I think he said he hugged him around the middle, which is his belly. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one and had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior, Mr. Dursley wondered? Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Should we stop there? Or should we finish this page?
All wait till we see Harry riding the bicycle.
That's page 10. I think it's a little far.
Get to this page.
But it's getting late. We're going to have to wrap it up soon. We'll finish.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone game.
That says The Boy Who Lived.
found the boy can get.
Yeah.
We'll do together.
Yeah.
Got your finger yank from chatting.
All right. Let's read to the end of this page, okay? Mrs. Dursley had a nice normal day.
Don't read to the end of the page.
Oh, just stop now?
No! Why did he put a white cloud in the S?
We'll put the white cloud right there?
Yeah.
They just have little white clouds in the pictures, and sometimes they're behind some of the words. Mrs. Dursley had a nice normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. next-door neighbor's problem with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, shan't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. Shan't, which means I shall not. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The news anchor allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now over to Jim McGuffin for the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that. But it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly lately. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not till next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. That's the end of that page.